on the ship, and it's known after last night. I talked to one or two people. I don't know whether now whether you should you can cut this out or not.
Sure.
I don't want to get the guys in trouble, but they know that she's structurally that this was not safe.
Now, Red was upset because he had heard that those family members weren't going to get their just due in monetary. So literally he told them, I'm going to blow the whistle. He said, I was in Fraser Shipyard wintering the ship. I know that that ship was structurally bad, that the hull was welded where they actually went in and stuffed welding rod and put a bead across the top of it. So there were areas where they repaired the freighter and that there were issues with it. Now, Roscoe's done more research in this than I have, and he's found more people from the shipyard who quite honestly have come forward to say that, that this was part of the issue. So before we get too much into what happened, there's no question it was the storm that sank this ship. The question was, why didn't the Anderson get sunk too? Because it was right behind the Fitzgerald. And why was it the Edmund Fitzgerald? And that's where we're calling into structural problems for it. Go ahead to the next. Oh, go ahead and turn this down. We already talked to the captain about this. When I put this documentary together, it's called the Edmund Fitzgerald Investigations. I really wanted to go through and do something that the other documentaries hadn't done, and that's to go through and interview former crew, interview people who built the ship, and also interview people from all of the expeditions. Nobody had an interview from Jean-Michel Cousteau. Nobody had an interview from Whitefish Point, and quite honestly, there was a lot of bad blood between our expedition with Shannon and Whitefish. There was real bad blood to where Whitefish Point, if you ever watch any videos by Whitefish Point, you'll see that Shannon's expedition is never mentioned, and that's part of the deal. They cannot use Whitefish Point museum footage prior to this new regime that came in because if you mention the other expedition. So I was very lucky to be able to get all the pieces and the parts to be able to put it together, and even more so afterwards to literally put all the extra materials that I didn't use in the documentary into a searchable DVD basis afterwards that you can go through. So we're almost done with this probably. I wish you could zap right through it, because see if you can get to the main part. There you go, go to next. We're waiting because the tugboat's on its way, and I just wanted to fill you guys in on some of the other information as the tugboat's coming out. I do invite you, if you want to go up and look with each of the names, the 29 crew members that are there. You can pause and reflect on each one of them, and their titles are on there as well. Why don't we go roll the bow tear real quick to show some of that footage, and then.
Audio?
Yeah. How are you on time? How are we on time?
We're just waiting for the tug.
Okay.
If the tug doesn't get here by 8, we'll go.
And if there was anybody in the audience too that worked on the Fitz, that that built the Fitz, or would like to come and say a couple of words too, you're more than welcome to. Again, as we wait for a tugboat that's a little overdue. Can you roll it? Go ahead and roll it again. This is that stern section we talked about in the red anti-fouling paint that's on there. As we go across the bottom, we'll see the tear, and it's ripped like almost like a sheet of paper. I mean, it's incredible, the edges, if you would have magnified them to see that it's not a clean break that we saw on the Carl Bradley or we saw on the Daniel J. Morrell, but literally ripped at the seams where the steel completely ripped off. There's no place to tell whether or not it was in a certain area that it went down, and we have the midsection of that ship that's mostly buried in the silt, so it's difficult for us to go out there. And quite honestly, in 1994 when we went, we did not do much in that center area at all. Go ahead and hit next. Here's the Coast Guard drawing that was incorrect. This whole anchor pocket is collapsed in. There's a lot more damage on the sides. There's actually, the lake bottom actually comes up to this side equal, and it doesn't show it in there. We talked to the artist of the drawing. He said that the reason that those pieces weren't showing up on there is because he ran out of time. He didn't have enough footage from the underwater robot, so a lot of it he just looked at a freighter and drew it in. So when we look up here, we don't see any of the antennas that were there or the bell that's in there either. Roscoe, next. Here's a side view. This is a telltale part. I was upset when Gordon changed his song that the main hatchways, he would change that, because these first two hatchways did give in. There's 22 hatches on the Fitzgerald, but these front two are collapsed in. And I think that what happened was a big wave had washed up on the deck. She was already taking in water probably when she was flexing, and those waves collapsed those two hatches. I went over them in a submarine. I saw them laying inside the hatch. So when Gordon says that he didn't want to say the main hatchways gave in, he's right in the fact that there's no main hatchway, but 1 and 2 are collapsed in. The NTSB in their report said that this ship literally was inundated with a wave. There's proof in that, in the fact that these were caved in, and if you look at the observation lounge, which is right back here, there's evidence that the wave hit the back of it, blew the windows in, and dented the visor, sun visor that's in there inward instead of backward. So that's what made it take its dive and made it, so quickly. Next.
Yep. Our boat's not going to be here, so in about 2 minutes we're going to have them come up and we're going to do it at the dock.
Okay, good. No boat, so we're going to go out to the dock in just a couple seconds. All right, let's click once on the hatch. On an old freighter, this is how they used to take care of the hatches. And they would put these on the deck, and then they would put tarpaulin over the top of them. When we went to steel hatches and gaskets, the Coast Guard was fairly impressed with the system and said it's not going to leak. So they allowed us to carry more cargo in the freighters. They lowered the load line and allowed them to carry more. Now when the Fitzgerald sank, the instant thing the Coast Guard said was, we're going to rescind those load line regulations because we knew those hatches were leaking. They went into the Herbert Jackson, the sister ship, if you will, of the Fitz. They're not identical, but they could see light around each of the hatches. Almost a 1/16 of an inch gap on there. And the calculation made by the Coast Guard was that it would only take 2 hours of washing waves into like that would cause enough water in there, and because they couldn't pump it out, it would come out. Most people discount that. They think that it's just simply not enough water that would come in, but that the hogging of the ship would have brought enough water in there to make her low enough in the water for that wave to come on. Let's go ahead and roll the video on the hatch clamps. When we talked about the Kessner clamps, here's a hatch cover and a combing coming up right here. Here's those clamps on the bottom. This is on my sub visit, which was the 3rd visit on Delta. We went down, I had an hour on the site. Unfortunately for me, I had studied every other shipwreck but the Fitzgerald in 1994. So now I have all this information in my head and so many questions, and the Canadian government simply won't issue us a permit. And quite honestly, how would you find the $70,000? We heard Fred on the radio or on the phone. It's incredibly expensive. When they brought the bell up, the Native Americans in the casinos actually helped fund it, because it was a big thing for the museum. But if you don't have the backing of a museum, or you don't have a backing of the Canadian Navy that helped out, it's impossible to go in and actually do these kinds of things on your own. That's why it was so incredible when Fred Shannon pulled this together, and he called a bunch of us together. I was a television reporter, and he said, we need a camera crew, and he wanted us to pay him to go. And I said, Whitefish Point had already been there the week before. It's already been on my competition TV station. I can't, make my station pay $20,000. So we told Fred that we would offer all of our video services, but we got the video, he gets the video, and it would be a mutual deal. And it worked out really well that way. Let's roll Wilson, and this will be the last ta-da on the hatch clamps.
As she took on water, she went deeper in the water. So now instead of having your 6 foot of freeboard, you have 4 foot. But if you have 4 foot, then the waves breaking across the deck are higher, and they have greater pressure. And they're there more consistently. Stan did some calculations on them. I don't have them. I got them someplace probably. But, and he came up with, if you were taking water on deck and 1/3 of one side of every other hatch was not tight. It only had a 32nd inch gap in it, okay? And 10% of the waves were breaking over the hatches.
Go back without a good reason. We know if Bob Ballard put in, he found the Titanic, if he asked, I bet you they would give him permission. Whitefish Point went out with a underwater sonar system, top of the line. somewhat illegally. There's a gray area on whether or not they were allowed to go out there, and they probed the wreck site and came back with a picture that looked like the spar deck or the hatch deck had collapsed into the ship. And now all of us are thinking, we've got to go see it. Now, I think it's an anomaly. I think it's wrong, because I've never seen, and I've seen over 110 shipwrecks underwater, including huge steel vessels. I've never seen that deck collapse like that. I think it's just the way the echo came in, and you can't even tell where the hatch coamings are, so there's no way that that just collapsed and it's just an empty hull. There's stuff that would have been in there. So we still want to see it. And they were admonished, the Whitefish Point, they were told, and then they passed a new law in Canada that said you can't even go over it with sonar, so they kind of covered that gray area because they want to, you know, keep that off limits. There's only 2 other shipwrecks that the Canadian government protect that way, and that's the Hamilton and the Scourge, which sank in 1812, that Jacques Cousteau had seen, but we can't dive it. So luckily in the Great Lakes, all of these wrecks are open for us to investigate. We can go down and visit any of the wrecks without anybody telling us where we can go. But I do understand the Canadian government. And again, we do talk about how it being, you know, it is a grave site, and nobody thinks about that more than I do. Especially when my dive came up, we had a little bit of battery left in the submarine, and the owner of the tugboat said, if I can take my son down there, I'll give you a deal on the price of the boat. And they went down there, got lost, and found a man on the bottom with a life jacket on. And it was significant. We had headlines for 3 months about that, and quite honestly, it put a totally different twist on it. We were all excited. We were on this massive shipwreck, and it made us really think. And to this day, I still remember that, you know, that footage and think about that lost person. So it did make it a lot more real for us.
We're going to bring Pam up to go out to the dock, and we're going to
Fantastic, Pam.
We're going to bring the reef, and if everyone wants to
Call it out. You know what's going on.
Okay, at the conclusion, we want to thank everyone that came today, and we hope you enjoyed this program. Pam Johnson and her family is going to go out to the rail here, something we do each year. We're going to put the reef in the water, and that'll conclude today's program.
I'm happy to be able to do this tonight with my brother Randall and my daughter Lori. We've all come a long way, put a lot of miles on cars and airplanes to get here.